Humble narrators. Look out, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be a loud concert. Got speakers for this one. Yeah. Hi, I'm Robert McBride of All Classical FM, the radio station you were all listening to in your cars on the way here, right?
But not only.
Mozart Violin Concerto.
Yeah, I heard it. Who is playing?
I don't know. I heard it too, but I don't know who was.
Yeah.
It was not Carlos Kalmar because he no longer plays the violin, at least not very publicly.
Yeah, I would.
This is Carlos Kalmar, the music director of the Oregon Symphony,
Good
ladies and
evening.
gentlemen. How are you, former violinist?
Because I'm a former violinist, I'm fine.
And we're fine too. Carlos has cooked up an interesting concert tonight. It's always kind of fun for me to look at your concert programs and try to figure out what the thought was behind them, because I know there is actually thought behind every one of them. So it appears to me that tonight's concert is a concert of two halves in which the two halves don't have anything to do with each other, but the two pieces on each half definitely relate to each other. I got it right. For once, I got it right. So there's this great symphony by Mozart, nicknamed the Prague Symphony. In some German-speaking lands, it's known as the symphony without a minuet. There's three movements. He wrote it that way, left out the minuet. And so what does Carlos do? He begins the concert with a minuet. Cute.
You think it's smart, right?
I like it. I like it. And again, you're bringing us a piece this orchestra has never played before. You've been doing that a lot lately. Thank you.
Well, I always do that. Actually, I was, in a way, very pleasantly surprised that Falstaff by Elgar has been played here, which is great. No, the Minuet Antique by Ravel, it serves a purpose. First, the purpose that you pointed out. Mozart's symphony has no minuet. Second, it serves the purpose of introducing us to something French, so that none of the halves of this concert goes into one direction. I mean, the Mozart is Austrian, the Elgar and the Walton are very British, and so let's go somewhere else.
And yet, at the very end, we hear a French melody.
Well, yeah. Kind of.
I hadn't thought of that until just now. And
yeah.
You hadn't
and
either. Okay.
On top of that, I didn't think about, but now that we have to make up something about intellectuality of programming.
Never trust what you're hearing from us.
The thing is that, of course, Falstaff by Elgar, it's about a theatrical piece that was written ages before Elgar even lived. So it's very backwards looking, at least theme-wise. And the Minuet Antique by itself is a contradiction, because it includes, minuet is a minuet, which we all know from all the symphonies and all the sonatas, etc., by Mozart, Haydn, and all those folks, and maybe by other composers as well. But antique is, it doesn't exist. In antique music, and Ravel was specifically relating to Greece, antique Greece, there was no minuet. It's completely wrong. So he put it there just to, so that we could think about what he actually meant. And I don't really know what he meant, but it shows Ravel's love for old thematics, old topics. I mean, during his life, some of his very great works were related to old themes. First of all, there is always Daphnis and Chloe, which is ancient, and there is the Pavane pour un enfant de fond, which is old, and there is the Tombeau de Couperin, which relates to pre-Baroque music, etc., etc. And so there is this minuet. This minuet actually is one of the very first pieces that Ravel wrote in his life that were published. It's kind of a student's work, and it's a very nice little piece, and it was written for the piano, and he orchestrated it, I think, 25 years later after he wrote it. And it's just a, I like I liked also the idea of putting this minuet on the front of the concert, because when we are done with tonight's concert and you try to recall, okay, what have I heard and what was it all about and what were maybe you can even recall the way we played, then you have three very distinctive layers. On one side, the British pieces are especially well, both. But the Walton is minimal. It's 2 minutes of Walton. But the British piece is very muscular. You dig in really with all the power you have. It's very, what we call very meaty way of playing. The Mozart is very pointed, very, in a way, classic drama. So in the beginning there has to be something relating to classical music like Mozart would have written, but French. So when we were rehearsing this, and the orchestra was doing fantastic, but I still was looking for a specific color. I told them, you know, you play this brilliantly, but you have to play it like when we look at these French movies from the 50s, like you have a glass of wine in one hand and a half-lit cigarette in the other hand, and the third hand, which you don't have, in the pocket, and you're very laid back, and you just don't really, hey, what's up? With that attitude. And I think they got it. It's not very like, ah! It's more like, let's be French.
If he was making all that up on the spot, he was doing a very good job, don't you think? And then this wonderful Mozart Symphony, which is a very dramatic piece. Some of it is Don Giovanni, serious and scary, and some of it is almost like comic opera. And it's got all these great contrasts of wonderful writing for the winds and terrific power. It's one of my favorite Mozart symphonies.
I cannot explain why, because of course I'm a Mozart fan. Have been that all my life, and whoever is not a Mozart fan, I don't know what to do with that human being. Anyway, but amongst all the Mozart symphony, I always loved this one very much. There are, I mean, every Mozart symphony I had the pleasure of conducting, it's always a revelation. This man is a genius. I mean, just recalling the genius, it was when Mozart was 8 years old, he was presented to court by his father, so he played in front of the king, and there was at that time, the music director for the court of the king, and the music director comes to Mozart. Mozart's this little blonde boy. Sits there on the harpsichord waiting for something to happen, and the music director comes and puts in front of Mozart a piece that is complicated and Mozart has never seen before, and Mozart just not even a problem. And the music director said, I have heard Johann Sebastian Bach play, and nobody comes near Johann Sebastian Bach. Of course not. But this boy plays at his age as well as Johann Sebastian played when he was the old Johann Sebastian Bach. And later we know all, or maybe we don't, but many of us may know that Joseph Haydn, undoubtedly one of the fathers of classical music overall, said to Mozart's father that, I believe before God, I tell you that your son is the greatest composer known to me. And then this Mozart is invited, then this Mozart writes Marriage of Figaro and has the great premiere in Vienna, has the greatest success in Vienna, but in a way it was a strange success, because on one side the scholars said this opera is to die for, whereas the general public had a little more trouble with it because it's intricate, it's complicated, it's long, and so on. So he took the opera to Prague, and the people of Prague just ate it up. Oh my God, they adored Mariachi Figure, and they invited Mozart to come and conduct, and Mozart brought to them his newest symphony, this one. Now, to think that Mozart actually wrote the symphony for that purpose, for Prague, it's not accurate. He maybe have written at least a grand portion of that already in Vienna, thinking about, we can speculate about what he was thinking. The symphony was kind of ready to go. He did some retouches, presented it in Prague. People went wild. After the symphony was premiered, Mozart had to sit at the harpsichord and improvise for nearly an hour. It was that crazy. Now, because we both agree that this is one of the greatest, among the greatest symphonies written, this is one of the greatest. Why is that? I don't know. You can explain why it is to you. For me, it is probably because it is, the character-wise, it's a two-dimensional piece. That's a minimalistic way of explaining it. It has this very celebratory, maybe even uplifting, sometimes very rushed character if you look at the last movement, but it's also a very dark piece. And I always adored this symphony, not only but mainly because of the first movement, because the first movement starts with a slow portion that is so majestic and so meaningful and so deep that you already think Don Giovanni is looking over Mozart's shoulder, which actually was true, because once Mozart had this great success in Prague playing his Mariachi Figure, he got a commission, and a year later he was in Prague presenting his Don Giovanni. So that's there. And then all this work with how the character of the fast part of the first movement even starts. It comes out of darkness and has this very strange, very subdued accent at the beginning. For me, it's a miracle. And Mozart is full of miracles. And I don't want to be boring and to talk to you about things that we musicians and scholars find in this composition, such as that the technical structure and the architectural work in this symphony is Mozart at the peak of what he could do, and boy, he could do a lot of things. In other words, it would be easy to demonstrate, if I would have an orchestra in my background right now, showing you the symphony you are going to hear in the first half, why Mozart is such a genius and what makes him distinctive from, for example, another quite good composer like Mr. Muzio Clementi, same time. What is that makes Mozart so outstanding? And it is because the inner work of the music, it not only fits together, it is just more complex. Sometimes you think, when you look at Mozart and you hear this melody and that melody and the third melody, and all at the same time, and you think, how can that be? But he makes it happen. So why is this symphony your favorite?
For all of those reasons. Exactly. Now, I hope nearly everyone in this room has seen the magnificent film Amadeus, right? Oh, you should all be raising your hands. It's such a good movie. A lot of that was shot in Prague. And I don't know, that always resonates with me in my memory and my mind whenever I hear anything by Mozart that has to do with the city of Prague. It's such a beautiful city and so well preserved. And it just makes me want to go there again.
One thing about that movie, because it explains very...
Look who just walked in. It's Falstaff, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey!
David Ogden Stiers.
David Ogden Stiers. You have to work, David.
And you know that I don't have to work. Can you hear me? Well, of course. Here we are. I actually don't have to work. I just lower the belt a little bit, and nature does the rest.
He thought he could sneak in.
The one thing that I want to mention in conjunction with the movie, if you haven't seen the movie, first of all, see the movie. It's a great movie. Second, I remember that in the first scene of that movie, the first 3 minutes, if I recall, explain the miracle of Mozart already. You don't, see the rest too. But if you're looking, what makes Mozart so grand? The movie starts with Murray J. Abraham playing Salieri, sitting there being old and slightly and he talks about...
You got an Oscar for that.
And he talks about when he first heard a piece by Mozart, and it was the Partita for Winds. And he says something along the line of the piece starts like in a way grinding chords, which you think like, no, Mozart didn't write for grinding. Anyway, for a person at that way. And then Murray Abraham says, and then an oboe. And he talks about that miracle that this thing does. And then you, of course, go home and look for that piece, and you listen to it, and you think, yeah, that's it.
Don't watch the director's cut. I've yet to see a director's cut that improved on the original version of a movie. And Amadeus, the director's cut, changes the tone of it in ways that I don't like. But that's me. Who cares what I think? Even I don't care what I think. All right. After the Mozart, halftime, you can have a glass of wine if you wish. Then we get into the most unusual part of the program, where we have two works inspired by Shakespeare by two different English composers who, according to Carlos Kalmar in your program notes, hated each other, which I think is interesting. We could talk about that. But you also have three actors. We just saw one of them, David Ogden Stiers. What are they doing? Are they talking over the music? No. So they talk between the two
let
pieces?
Let me very briefly explain. In a way, even in our explanation, we don't need really to talk about Walton. Because I tell you why it is the way you are going to hear it. Falstaff wrote Elgar. It's a symphonic poem. It is pretty much 35 minutes of extremely colorful...
You just said Falstaff wrote Elgar, which I think is interesting.
Oh, Freud would love that
yes,
already.
Okay,
Elgar wrote Falstaff. Let me start over. Let's try that. Elgar wrote Falstaff. It's a 35 or whatever minutes of music, very intense, very meaty, as I always have said. And it depicts mostly scenes from Falstaff as written by William Shakespeare in Henry IV. Now, Elgar thought that this was probably his best work. So I thought to myself, if Elgar thinks that this is probably his best work, why doesn't anybody know it? So I studied it. I've conducted this piece in the original version. The original version has nothing to do with actors. It is not intended to be that way. Now, the piece evolves and it does an entire arch, Falstaff and Prince Hal and the pranks and getting drunk and snoring and dozing off when you have drunk way too much wine and have had too much fun, blah, blah, blah. At the end, Falstaff dies. Music dies down. We are very quiet at the end. And if the piece would have ended there, probably we will all have no problem with this piece other than, okay, the conductor can't stand there and cheer because it's so loud at the end, but that's my problem. Anyway, and then Elgar writes additionally 12 bars of music, and then the music makes plop. And the reaction, and I have seen that. I was in conducting. The reaction by the audience is always, aha. And nobody, because it's a tricky ending, what he writes. So I thought, how can we kind of popularize this? And that's how, together with the wonderful Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, we developed this. Baltimore, years ago, asked me for a program based on Shakespeare overall, where we utilize actors. And I said, if you guys in Baltimore have some people in theater who are willing to look at Falstaff by Elgar and place pieces of Henry IV into that, maybe we have a deal. And that's how we developed this. So there are scenes of Henry IV that relate very clearly to what you are going to hear in the music, played either before or in between the movement of the piece. And also to avoid this very strange ending that I have told you about, after the piece by Falstaff is over, there is a very short scene of maybe 45 seconds where the king, not Prince Hal, but now King Henry V appears, and he goes to war, what kings did in those times. And then we play this little segment of the embarkation by William Walton, which is very majestic, uplifting, battle-like, and then everything ends. And it's just to facilitate the understanding of everything, and that's why it's there. So if you don't like it, if you think that is actually a construction, please blame this guy.
Gladly. Okay, so you have three actors. We have Falstaff, Prince Hal, who becomes the king, and who? Salieri?
Points.
Ah.
Salieri? No. Points. And of course, it's mainly about Prince Hal and Falstaff. And the good thing is, both in the play, for me, I tell you what, first of all, it's wonderful to see these actors, and David, of course, it's a joy to always work with him. He was with us doing Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme last year here on this stage. But for me, as English is not my native tongue, as you may hear, and for me to listen to Shakespearean English, it's challenging. It's not so easy, and I don't know for you, but because it's an ancient way of expressing. But whenever I listen to them, aside from the glory of listening to great actors, it cracks me up how insulting Shakespeare is. Oh my God, what they say to each other. You wouldn't dare to say that to nowadays. But it's very fun.
That's why they had all those sword fights.
Oh yes. So in this piece by Falstaff, you have actually very distinctive movements. So in the play as well. First it is Falstaff and his buddy Prince Hal doing pranks, and there is a robbery involved, and at the end of the very first movement that the music plays, you're going to hear that finally the music comes down. Our principal bassoonist, Karen Miller, will do a fantastic interpretation of Falstaff just drinking way too much. It's very, and after that you hear, led by our tuba Jatik Clark, you hear actually Falstaff snoring. Trust me, when you know that there is snoring, you hear him snoring. And boy, you don't want to be even in the next room when somebody snores like that. Then we do another little scene of the play, then there is this remembrance. Then comes actually the only part in Falstaff by Elgar that is quiet. Because Falstaff remembers himself when he was a boy at court, and probably was a thin boy and cute, and before he became what he became. And then we go on, and we have a sequence where Falstaff is asked by the king to provide soldiers, and Falstaff does that. We hear a little bit of battle music in everything. And then comes the second interlude. And there, after the second interlude comes another scene of Falstaff, of Henry IV, which will tell you the story that you are going to hear later in the music, which is when Prince Hal is being crowned as the king, Henry V, Falstaff he thinks, well, my life has been good so far, but now it's going to be way better because my body is king. So the doors will open, and he rushes to court, and the king says, I don't know thee, old man, and dismisses it and tells him, you are not to go near me by pain of death. And Falstaff actually dies from broken heart. And you hear all of that in music. Now, as I have been talking about the weird ending and why we do it differently, the weird ending of Falstaff by Edward Elgar is because on one side you can argue that after one person, even the central person of a symphonic poem dies, life actually goes on. But what you hear after he's dead is very briefly something that reflects music related to Prince Hal and going to battle, and the meaning of that is that the stern reality has won, and the king is going to be king for probably another 20, 30 years, while we all can forget about this fat old man. And I always have believed, and the more I have the pleasure of conducting this piece, I believe this is a phenomenal piece of music. And so I have for a long while, I have thought about bringing it here to our stage in this form.
And tonight's the night. Interesting concert, no? I think we're all going to enjoy it. Tonight's chat has been videotaped by our man Joe sitting there, and you can catch that on the website allclassical.org, or tell your friends about it. Tell them to come on Monday night when you'll do this concert again.
Or tell them to drive to Tacoma tomorrow afternoon.
That's what that Tacoma thing backstage was about? You're doing it there?
We're doing it there.
I didn't know. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, good luck. And thank you. Carlos Kalmar.
Robert McBride.
That's a pretty good one, actually.